The mining colony of Yalta 7 clung to the Borovian rim like a desperate gambler betting on one last hand. Out here, survival wasn't guaranteed. It was carved, chipped, and clawed out of the crust alongside the precious zentrite veins. Dust storms hissed against the domes, power grids gave out at the worst possible times, and every resident knew the razor-thin margin between thriving and vanishing. The market square mirrored that precarious spirit. Shacks patched from scrap metal leaned like drunken sentries around the bustling hub. Traders hawked limp hydroponic vegetables and glittering zentrite baubles, their voices tangling in the hot, recycled air. Fried mealworms sizzled in vats of mystery oil, filling the square with a scent that was somehow both repellent and mouth-watering. Yalta 7's 100-odd inhabitants were a mismatched patchwork of former corporate contractors, dreamers, and the occasional exile. They argued, haggled, and thrived in the chaos, bound together by one unspoken truth: they had to make it work. No one else was coming to save them. Rumors rarely stirred excitement, and the square supply delays and long-haul distress calls had dulled most people's nerves. But today was different. Whispers buzzed through the crowd like static electricity. An apex-class predator muttered a miner near the water reclamation stall, his voice shaky. "They say it tore through the Solaris blade," a trader added, pale under the dome lights. "Left nothing but scrap and shadows." Standing in line for his ration of limp greens, Leor Hayes smirked. "Let me guess," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "They're saying it's unstoppable, right?" The nearby cluster of miners turned to him, wary. No one contradicted him. It was hard to argue with Leo, a man who had a knack for keeping his head when everyone else lost theirs. "Funny thing about unstoppable," he said with a wry grin. "It's usually stopped by someone with more guts than sense. You'll see." The elderly woman at the ration counter chuckled as she handed him his meager allotment. Leor Hayes, ever the optimist. "Optimism's just realism with a plan," Leo replied, adjusting the strap of his tool satchel. "No sense panicking over what you can't fix. And if you can fix it, you might as well get started." His philosophy had carried him through hull breaches, zentrite rig malfunctions, and the near collapse of Yalta 7's water systems. If trouble was coming, Leo's plan was the same as always: assess, adapt, and hope he didn't end up in the next cautionary tale miners whispered about over mealworms. The trouble arrived just after noon. The market square was at its usual fever pitch when a shadow swept across the dome. At first, no one noticed. Then, slowly heads turned skyward, conversations faltered, and the square's chaotic hum died into a tense, collective silence. Leo squinted at the glass overhead, expecting a supply freighter or stray meteor shower. Instead, his stomach twisted. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't natural. The creature prowling along the colony's scaffolding shimmered like liquid metal. Its obsidian black body moved with unnerving fluidity, 6 limbs tipped with claws that pierced steel like paper. Armored plates rippled down its back, catching the dull light of the twin suns, and its golden eyes burned with a cold, alien intelligence. Leo froze, the bag of produce slipping from his fingers. Around him, murmurs turned to screams. "It's here. Get to shelter." A security officer's shout rang out, barely cutting through the panic. Crates overturned as parents grabbed their children and traders abandoned their stalls. Dried goods scattered across the ground, forgotten in the chaos. Leo's earpiece crackled. "Leo, where the hell are you?" Petra's voice was sharp, urgent. "By the square," he replied, his gaze locked on the beast as it slinked closer, claws glinting against the steel supports. "Then get inside. That thing'll gut you like a fish." Leo didn't move. His heart pounded, but not from fear, it was fascination. The creature wasn't attacking indiscriminately. It moved with intent, its golden eyes scanning the chaos like a predator assessing the weakest prey. A piercing scream snapped his focus. Near the edge of the square, a girl no older than 8 had fallen, her basket of supplies scattered. Her mother reached out but froze, terror rooting her to the spot. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Its gaze locked on the child and it crouched low. Leo moved before he could think. In 3 strides, he reached the girl, scooping her into his arms and tossing her toward her mother. The creature growled, a sound that rattled through his ribs. "Hey," Leo bellowed, snatching a wrench from his satchel. He raised it high like a sword, a stupidly human gesture in the face of an alien menace. "Over here, big guy." The creature's gaze shifted, its golden eyes narrowing as it focused on him. For a split second, Leo felt the weight of its intelligence, a cold, ancient calculation sizing him up. "Not the smartest plan I've ever had," he muttered under his breath. The beast lunged. Leo hit the ground hard, skidding to the side as the creature's claws slashed through the space he'd just occupied. The wrench clattered uselessly from his hand. "Move," he hissed to himself, scrambling to his feet as the beast wheeled around. Its movements were terrifyingly fluid, like water folding over itself, and it didn't seem to register the chaos erupting around them, only him. The crowd's screams blurred into background noise. Leo's focus sharpened to a single-point survival. He grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and held it defensively, not because he thought it would help, but because standing empty-handed felt worse. The creature crouched low, its golden eyes locked on him. For a moment it didn't lunge, it studied him. The way its gaze shifted, flicking between his face and the pipe, sent a chill down his spine. It was thinking. Behind him, the metallic clang of the dome's emergency shutters rang out. The colony was locking down. A few stragglers bolted toward the central hub, desperate to get behind the reinforced doors before they sealed. Leo spared a glance, his heart sinking as he saw the old ration clerk struggling to limp across the square. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. "Damn it," Leo growled. He didn't think he couldn't afford to. With a sharp whistle, he banged the pipe against the nearest steel beam. "Over here, ugly." The beast's focus snapped back to him. Its lips peeled back in what could almost be called a snarl. "Oh, you don't like that?" Leo muttered, backing slowly toward the market's industrial scaffolding. His pulse hammered in his ears, but he forced himself to keep moving, his eyes never leaving the creature. "Come on, big guy. Let's see how good you are at climbing." The beast lunged again, but this time Leo was ready. He sidestepped and darted toward the scaffolding, hoisting himself up with an agility he hadn't realized he still had. Years of patching zentrite drills and climbing repair towers paid off in the most absurd way as he scrambled higher, the pipe shoved awkwardly into his tool belt. The creature didn't hesitate. With a leap that made Leo's stomach drop, it landed on the scaffolding below him, its claws digging into the metal with a screech. "All right, so you're good at climbing," noted Leo muttered, pulling himself onto a horizontal beam. Below, the beast prowled, golden eyes tracking his every move. It wasn't rushing, it was waiting, testing. Leo Petra's voice crackled through his earpiece, sharp and frantic. "What are you doing up there?" "Making friends," he said through gritted teeth, adjusting his balance as the beam wobbled. "That thing's going to kill you." Maybe, he admitted, but at least it won't be on the ground with everyone else. The beast growled low, a sound that vibrated through the scaffolding and into Leo's chest. He felt its weight shift as it started climbing again, methodical and deliberate. His mind raced. He had no weapons, no plan, and no idea what would happen if it caught him. Except, maybe it wasn't trying to catch him. Not really. He froze. The realization hit like a jolt of electricity. It had him cornered twice already on the ground and again on the scaffolding. Each time it had hesitated, watching him instead of striking. "You could have gutted me by now," Leo murmured, more to himself than to the creature. "So what are you waiting for?" The beast stopped climbing. It crouched on the beam below, golden eyes narrowing. Its head tilted slightly, the way a predator might assess an unfamiliar prey. Or something else. The moment stretched, taut and silent. Slowly, Leo raised his hands, palms open. "All right," he said softly, "no pipe, no running, just me." The creature shifted, its claws clicking faintly against the beam. Then, to his astonishment, it let out a low, resonant growl, not the guttural rumble of a threat, but something softer, almost inquisitive. "Petra," he whispered into the earpiece. You still there?" Barely, she replied, her voice tense. "What the hell are you doing?" "Call off the lockdown," Leo said, his gaze never leaving the creature. "I think it's trying to communicate." "Have you lost your mind? That thing isn't attacking," he interrupted. "I'm telling you, Petra, it's holding back. It's waiting." "For what?" "For me to figure that out." The creature's growl deepened slightly, a vibration that seemed to echo through the metal beams. Leo stayed perfectly still, his mind working furiously. If it wanted to attack, it would have already. Instead, it had cornered him, and now it was watching. Testing. "Fine," Leo muttered, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the beam. He reached into his satchel, pulling out the ultrasonic calibrator. It wasn't much, just a rigged-together tool he used for frequency alignment on mining drills, but it was the only thing he had that could produce a sound this creature might recognize. "Let's see if you're as smart as I think you are." He flipped the calibrator on, adjusting the dial until it emitted a low, steady hum. The creature's ears twitched, its head tilted again, its golden eyes narrowing as it crouched lower. "Yeah," Leo said quietly, watching it closely. "You hear that, don't you?" The creature didn't move, but its growl softened, shifting to a low, rhythmic chuff. Leo's breath caught. It wasn't just a sound, it was a response. His mind raced as he adjusted the calibrator, cycling through frequencies. The creature's reactions were subtle but distinct. Its ears flicked, its claws flexed, and it let out occasional rumbles, each one carrying a distinct cadence. "You're listening," he murmured, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're actually listening." The creature chuffed again, a sound that felt less like a threat and more like acknowledgement. For the first time, Leo felt something other than fear, something closer to awe. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't unstoppable. It was intelligent. And it was waiting for him to keep up. By evening, Yalta 7's lockdown held steady, but the colony buzzed with speculation. Behind sealed shutters and hastily reinforced doors, residents whispered about the predator prowling the dome's edge. For all their fear, none could ignore the man who'd faced it and lived. Inside the control room, tension pressed like a weight against the walls. Petra paced near the central console, her jaw tight. Carver, the colony's grizzled security chief, leaned over a map of the perimeter, stabbing his finger at points on the holographic display. "This is madness," Carver growled, his voice a low rumble. "We've got an apex predator circling us like a wolf in a chicken coop, and you want to. What? Invited in for tea." Across the room, Leo sat casually on the edge of a console, arms crossed. "Tea's not my style. Maybe a handshake." Carver's glare could have melted plasteel. "You think this is a joke?" "No," Leo replied, his tone sharp. "I think it's a problem we can't solve by pointing a gun at it." Carver's fist slammed the console, making the hologram flicker. "We've got families here, Hayes, kids. I'm not waiting for that thing to decide we're a snack." Petra stepped between them, raising a hand. "All right, enough. Leo, tell me you've got more than instinct to back this up." Leo leaned forward, tapping his earpiece to bring up a recording. "I've been tracking its responses," he said, pulling up a graph of sound frequencies and patterns. "It's not random. It's rhythmic, structured. It's communicating." Petra frowned, leaning over the console. The graph showed two distinct patterns, one from the creature, the other from the calibrator Leo had used. "You're sure about this?" "As sure as I can be without a full xenolinguistics team," Leo replied. "Look, I don't know what it wants yet, but it's not mindless. If we start shooting, we lose the only advantage we've got, its hesitation." Carver snorted. "And if that hesitation runs out?" "Then we're screwed anyway," Leo shot back, standing. "You think plasma rounds are going to do more than scratch that thing? It tore through the Solaris blade, and they had shields and heavy artillery. We don't stand a chance playing offense." Petra sighed, running a hand through her hair. She looked between the two men, weighing the impossible choice. "What's your plan, Leo?" "I need to go back out there," he said simply. Carver threw up his hands. "Oh, 4. Alone, Leo interrupted, silencing him. No weapons, no backup. Just the calibrator and a chance to figure out what it's trying to say. Petra's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" Deadly, Leo replied, his voice steady. "The more I engage with it, the more it responds. If I can establish a real pattern, we might be able to bargain, or at least buy ourselves time." Carver scoffed. "And if it decides your dinner?" Leo shrugged. "Then you can say I told you so, but if I'm right, we might walk away from this without losing half the colony." Petra stared at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 12 hours. That's all I can give you. After that, we go with Carver's plan." Carver muttered something under his breath, but Leo didn't care. He was already heading for the workshop. The air outside the dome was harsh, laced with fine zentrite dust that clung to every surface. Leo adjusted the calibrator on his belt as he stepped past the perimeter shield, the faint hum of its energy fading behind him. The creature was out there, he could feel it, like a weight pressing against his instincts. "All right, big guy," he muttered, scanning the jagged cliffs surrounding the colony. "Let's see if you're still in the mood to chat." It didn't take long. The creature emerged from the shadows of a ridge, its obsidian body catching the faint light of Yalta 7's twin suns. It moved with the same unnerving grace, claws clicking softly against the rock as it descended toward him. Leo's breath hitched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He raised a hand, palm out, as he activated the calibrator. The device emitted a low, steady hum, the frequency carefully tuned to the patterns he'd recorded earlier. The creature stopped a few meters away, its golden eyes narrowing. For a long moment, neither moved. "Yeah, you hear it," Leo said softly. He adjusted the calibrator, adding a slight variation to the tone. The creature's ears twitched, and it let out a low, resonant growl, a sound that vibrated through the air like a living chord. Leo grinned despite himself. "Gotcha." He crouched slowly, lowering himself to the creature's eye level. It didn't flinch, though its claws flexed against the ground, leaving deep gouges in the rocky soil. Carefully, Leo adjusted the calibrator again, this time mimicking the creature's earlier rhythm. The response was immediate. The beast tilted its head, emitting a short, sharp chuff. It tapped its claws against the ground in a deliberate rhythm, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Leo's mind raced as he scrambled to copy the pattern. He tapped a nearby rock with the calibrator, mimicking the rhythm as closely as he could. The creature's eyes narrowed, its growl deepening, but it didn't move. Another chuff, followed by a new pattern. This one was longer, more complex, like a question. "You're testing me," Leo murmured. "You want to know if I can keep up." He matched the pattern again, this time faster. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, almost approving. It tapped out another rhythm, and Leo responded, each exchange growing more fluid. For the first time since it had appeared, Leo felt a flicker of understanding. This wasn't just a predator. It was intelligent, possibly more intelligent than anyone on Yalta 7 had given it credit for. And it wasn't here to destroy them. Not yet, anyway. The creature stepped closer, its massive frame looming over him. Leo tensed but held his ground, keeping the calibrator steady. "What do you want?" he asked softly. "Why us?" The creature didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, letting out a low, resonant rumble that sent vibrations through the air. Leo's earpiece crackled faintly, the interference distorting Petra's voice. "Leo," she said, her tone tense. "We've got movement on the scanners. 3 ships incoming." Leo's stomach dropped. "Syndicate." "Looks like it," Petra confirmed. "And they're armed." The creature growled again, sharper this time, its golden eyes flicking toward the distant horizon. It knew. Leo took a slow, steadying breath. "Guess we're about to find out what you're really here for." The Syndicate ships cut through the dusty horizon like blades, their matte black hulls gleaming under Yalta 7's twin suns. Even at a distance, their intent was clear. These weren't traders or scavengers. They were hunters. Back inside the control room, Petra's voice crackled in Leo's earpiece. 3 ships, full assault configuration. Shields are at 60%, and we've got maybe 10 minutes before they're in range. Leo glanced at the creature. Its ears twitched and its golden eyes tracked the approaching vessels. Its growl rumbled low and steady, vibrating through the ground beneath his boots. "You feel that, don't you?" Leo murmured, switching off the calibrator. The creature tilted its head toward him, its massive frame looming closer. "They're not here for me, or you. It's the Zentrite." The beast growled again, its gaze shifting back to the horizon. Its body tensed, claws flexing against the rock. It wasn't just aware of the approaching threat, it was preparing for it. "Leo, get back to the dome." Petra's voice was strained but firm. "The defenses won't hold long, but we'll keep the shields up as long as we can." "No point," Leo replied, watching the creature intently. "If those ships break through, we're done. Shields or no shields." "Then what the hell are you planning?" He adjusted his tool belt, fastening the calibrator securely. Improvising. The first plasma barrage hit the colony's shields 5 minutes later. Inside the dome, alarms wailed as the shimmering barrier rippled under the impact. Engineers shouted over the noise, frantically rerouting power to stabilize the grid. Petra leaned over a console, her knuckles white. Shields at 40% and falling fast. "Carver, get those turrets online." "Already on it," Carver barked, slamming a fist against the console. "Not that they'll do much against Syndicate plating." Outside the perimeter, Leo and the creature stood side by side, watching the approaching ships. The beast's growl deepened, a sound that seemed to resonate through the air like a warning. "You're not just smart," Leo said, glancing up at it. "You're tactical." The creature's golden eyes flicked to him briefly, as if acknowledging the observation. Then, with a low rumble, it began to move. Leo followed, his boots crunching against the rocky terrain as the beast climbed a jagged outcrop overlooking the colony. From their vantage point, the Syndicate ships were painfully close. Their sleek forms sliced through the air, plasma cannons glowing with deadly energy. Leo swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "All right, big guy," he said, pulling out the calibrator. "Let's see what you've got." The creature crouched low, its muscles coiling, with a tension that sent shivers down Leo's spine. When the lead ship fired again, its plasma barrage tearing through the shield like tissue paper, the beast lunged. It moved like a shadow given form, its obsidian black body a blur against the sky. Leo barely had time to blink before it slammed into the lead ship's hull, claws raking across the plating. Sparks flew as the vessel pitched violently, its stabilizers struggling to compensate. Inside the control room, Petra and Carver stared at the monitor in stunned silence. The creature's image dominated the screen, a terrifying silhouette against the Syndicate ship's fractured hull. "Is it fighting them?" Carver asked, his tone disbelieving. Petra's lips parted, but no words came. For once, she had no answer. The Syndicate crew scrambled to react, their comms erupting with panicked shouts. "Something's on the hull." "What the hell is it?" "Doesn't matter, get it off." Plasma turrets roared to life, firing wildly at the creature, but it was too fast. With a single, fluid motion, it ripped through the ship's main cannon, sending the barrel clattering to the ground below. Leo watched from the outcrop, his fists clenched. "That's 1 down. 2 to go." The second ship veered sharply, its thrusters burning bright as it circled to flank the colony. The creature leapt from the first ship, its massive frame landing with a deafening crash on the second's hull. Its claws tore into the plating, carving through layers of armor like a blade through cloth. "Come on," Leo muttered, adjusting the calibrator. He sent out a quick burst of sound, the frequency matching the patterns he'd established earlier. The creature's ears twitched, and it responded with a sharp, resonant chuff. It wasn't just fighting. It was coordinating. The second ship spiraled out of control moments later, its engines sputtering before erupting in a burst of orange light. The creature leapt free just before the explosion, landing heavily on the rocky plain below. "Leo," the third ship's breaking through Petra's voice cut through his earpiece. It's headed straight for the dome. He turned, his stomach sinking as the final ship roared toward the colony. Its cannons glowed ominously, primed for a direct strike. "Big guy," Leo shouted, scrambling down the outcrop. The creature's golden eyes locked onto him immediately, and he pointed toward the dome. "We've got one more." The beast let out a deep, rumbling growl and took off, its powerful limbs propelling it across the rocky terrain. Leo ran after it, his legs burning as he struggled to keep up. The Syndicate ship fired just as the creature reached the perimeter. Its claws slashed through the air, deflecting the plasma round into the ground. The explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the colony, but the dome held. The creature leapt onto the ship, claws finding purchase on its sleek hull. For a moment, Leo thought it might lose its grip. The Syndicate pilot was clearly more experienced than the others, twisting and rolling to shake the beast loose. But it wasn't enough. With a final, powerful strike, the creature tore into the ship's engines. Flames erupted as the vessel pitched violently, crashing into the plane with a deafening roar. The ground trembled beneath the impact, sending dust and debris billowing into the air. By the time the dust settled, the colony was eerily silent. Residents emerged cautiously from their shelters, their faces pale and disbelieving. The Syndicate ships were gone, two destroyed. One fled, and the creature stood at the edge of the perimeter, its obsidian-black body gleaming faintly in the dim light. Leo approached slowly, his heart pounding. The beast's golden eyes turned to him, watching as he drew closer. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "But you did." The creature rumbled low, a sound that felt almost like acknowledgement. It lowered its head slightly, its massive frame shifting as it settled onto the ground to rest. Inside the control room, Petra exhaled sharply, leaning against the console. "I can't believe it," she muttered. "It saved us." Carver grumbled something under his breath, but even he couldn't deny the truth. The colony owed its survival to the very thing they'd feared. Leo crouched beside the creature, resting a hand against its armored side. "You're not just a predator," he said quietly. "You're a protector." The beast rumbled again, its golden eyes gleaming as it watched him. Yalta 7 had faced destruction and survived, but Leo knew this wasn't the end. The creature wasn't just an ally, it was a bridge to something greater. And whatever challenges lay ahead, he had a feeling they wouldn't face them alone. The sun dipped below the jagged cliffs of Yalta 7, casting long shadows over the battered colony. Dust still hung in the air from the Syndicate's assault, coating every surface in a fine, gritty sheen. But against all odds, the dome still stood. In the market square, people milled about with cautious optimism. Conversations hummed in hushed tones, glances darting toward the outer perimeter where the creature rested, its massive body motionless save for the slow rise and fall of its breathing. Leo stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed as he watched the creature. Despite its stillness, he could feel its presence and unspoken understanding that their encounter had changed things. For better or worse, Yalta 7 wasn't the same colony it had been yesterday. Petra approached, her boots crunching against the dusty ground. "You've got everyone talking," she said, nodding toward the crowd. "Half think it's our savior. The other half want it gone before it changes its mind." Leo glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "What do you think?" "I think," she said carefully, "it's alive because of you. And so are we. That earns it some trust." "That's more than I expected," Leo admitted. "From you, anyway." She smirked, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't push your luck." The air shifted as the creature stirred, lifting its head to survey the square. People froze, their chatter cutting off mid-sentence. For a moment, the entire colony held its breath. Leo took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He raised his hands not as a gesture of surrender, but as a sign of openness. "You all right, big guy?" he asked, his voice steady. The creature tilted its head, emitting a low, resonant growl. The sound wasn't threatening, it carried the same cadence as their earlier exchange. A question. Leo reached into his satchel and pulled out the calibrator. The device hummed softly as he adjusted the frequency, mimicking the rhythm the creature had just used. It chuffed in response, the sound echoing across the square. Behind him, Petra muttered, "You really think it understands us?" "Not in the way we understand each other," Leo said, glancing back. "But it's listening. That's enough." The creature rose slowly to its feet, towering over the crowd. Its golden eyes scanned the square, lingering on the faces of those who had gathered. It stepped forward, claws clicking softly against the rocky ground. The crowd tensed, a ripple of unease passing through them. But Leo didn't move. He stood his ground, meeting the creature's gaze. "You protected us," he said, his voice carrying through the silence. "You didn't have to, but you did. So here's the deal, we'll protect you too. As long as you're with us, this place is as much yours as it is ours." The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, its golden eyes narrowing. For a moment, Leo wondered if he'd pushed too far. Then it lowered its head slightly, a gesture so subtle he almost missed it. A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. Petra folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "Did it just agree with you?" Leo grinned. "That's how I'm taking it." The repairs to the colony were slow but steady. Engineers worked tirelessly to restore the damaged shield generator, while miners reinforced the dome's supports with makeshift plating. Life returned to a cautious rhythm, though the shadow of the Syndicate's attack lingered. The creature became an unspoken part of that rhythm. It didn't linger near the dome itself, but roamed the rocky expanse beyond, its obsidian black form visible against the jagged cliffs. Some colonists began to refer to it as the Sentinel, while others avoided mentioning it at all. Leo spent most of his time tinkering in his workshop, refining the calibrator and poring over the patterns he'd recorded. Each time he ventured outside to test a new frequency, the creature appeared, responding with increasing complexity. It wasn't just a predator. Leo realized it was a puzzle, and he was only beginning to grasp its edges. One evening, as the suns dipped low, casting the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, Petra found him outside, seated on a rocky outcrop. The calibrator hummed faintly in his lap. "Still out here playing tunes?" she asked, dropping down beside him. "Not playing," Leo said, adjusting the dials. "Learning." She watched the creature in the distance, its silhouette stark against the setting suns. "You think it's alone?" "Out here, I mean." Leo hesitated. It was a question he'd asked himself a dozen times. If it is, it's by choice. Nothing this smart survives without a reason. Petra frowned, her gaze distant. "And if it's not alone? If there are more of them out there?" "Then we'd better make a good impression," Leo said with a smirk. "No one survives out here by picking fights they can't win." Petra let out a dry laugh. "Guess that's your specialty, isn't it?" "Worked so far." For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the hum of the calibrator blending with the faint whistle of the wind. Then, slowly, the creature turned and began moving toward them, its movements fluid and purposeful. Petra tensed. "It's coming this way." "Relax," Leo said, standing. "It's just curious." The creature stopped a few meters away, lowering its massive head to study them. Leo held up the calibrator, letting it emit a soft, pulsing tone. The beast rumbled in response, its claws tapping the ground in a deliberate rhythm. Leo smiled. "See? It's not so scary once you get to know it." Petra muttered something under her breath, but there was no denying the awe in her expression as she watched the exchange. The creature let out one final growl before turning and retreating into the distance, its massive form fading into the twilight. As the first stars appeared overhead, Leo tucked the calibrator into his satchel and turned to Petra. "Come on," he said. "We've got work to do." "What kind of work?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "The kind that keeps us ready," Leo replied. "For whatever comes next."